You know that feeling you get when you see a law and you just think, that's not right. It goes against something deeper, something more fundamental than just words on a page. Well, that feeling, it's the very heart of one of the oldest and most powerful ideas in all of legal philosophy, natural law. Today we're going to trace this incredible idea from its beginnings in ancient Greece all the way to the modern world. All right, let's get into it.
I mean, this is really the central question, isn't it? Is law just whatever a king or a president or a government decides it is, something that could change tomorrow on a whim? Or is it connected to some kind of higher truth, a set of universal principles that we don't invent, but that we actually discover? For thousands of years, some of the greatest minds in history have argued it's definitely the second one.
So let's put a pin in exactly what we mean by natural law. It's this core belief that there are rules for living a good life, a just life, that are basically baked into the universe itself and into our very nature as human beings. It's a philosophy where all the laws we write down, what we call positive law, are constantly being held up and measured against this higher universal moral code.
And our journey, well, it starts where so many big ideas start, ancient Greece. This is the place where philosophers first really began to wrestle with the nature of justice itself.
The first group to really stir the pot were the Sophists, and they did something that was totally revolutionary for their time. They separated law from religion. Now, their conclusion was a bit cynical. Basically, might makes right. Whoever has the power makes the rules. But, and this is the key part, by taking the gods out of the picture, they accidentally kicked open the door for a brand new way of thinking about where justice comes from.
Well, Plato and Socrates were not having any of that. For them, justice wasn't about raw power. It was about natural order. They believed everyone is born with different abilities, and a truly just society is one where everybody plays the part they were naturally meant to play. You've got your wise gold-class rulers, your brave silver-class protectors, and your hard-working copper and iron classes to make everything run.
And then Aristotle comes along and adds what is maybe the most important ingredient of all, rationality. He argued that it's not enough to just accept some natural order. Nope, we have to use our brains, our own human reason, to figure out what those natural principles actually are. For Aristotle, natural law was this perfect marriage of morality and pure reason.
Okay, so let's leave the philosophical lecture halls of Greece and head over to the Roman Empire. The Romans, well, they were pragmatists. They were less interested in abstract debates and way more interested in building an empire that actually worked. So they took these Greek ideas and they built a system out of them.
And what they created was, frankly, brilliant. They set up a three-part legal system. First, you had jus civile. That was the specific, everyday law for Roman citizens. Then there was jus gentium, which was like a law of nations for dealing with foreigners. But the real game changer for our story is that third level, jus naturale, the natural law.
And here is the absolutely crucial point. For the Romans, jus naturale wasn't just some abstract theory. It was a practical tool. It was a yardstick. They could take one of their own man-made laws, hold it up against the principles of natural law, and ask, does this measure up? Is this fair? Is this truly just?
All right, fast forward a bit. The Roman Empire has fallen, and Europe enters the medieval period. Now, the lens for looking at everything, including law, changes completely. Natural law gets deeply, deeply connected with Christian theology.
Early on, you had thinkers like St. Augustine, who believed the state should basically be run by the church. Any law made by humans had to line up perfectly with God's eternal law found in Scripture. But later, St. Thomas Aquinas came along with a more, let's say, nuanced approach. He argued that human institutions weren't necessarily sinful. They could be tools for justice, and he believed we could use our God-given reason to understand parts of God's plan.
In his absolute masterpiece, the Summa Theologica, Aquinas laid it all out. Think of it like a pyramid with 4 levels. At the very top, you have God's eternal law for the whole universe. One level down is natural law. That's the part of God's plan that we can figure out just by using our reason. Below that is divine law from the Scriptures. And at the very bottom is human law, which, to be just, has to be in harmony with all the levels above it.
Okay, let's jump forward again, this time to the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, because here comes another massive, earth-shattering shift. Thinkers started asking a radical question. Hey, can we ground natural law in human reason alone? Do we really need the church to be the middleman? And that question, well, it kicked off the age of the social contract.
And this era saw an absolute explosion of ideas. You had Grotius saying people choose their government through a contract. Then Hobbes, who was terrified of chaos, argued we have to surrender our rights to an all-powerful ruler just to have security. But then Locke fired back saying, no way, we keep our natural rights and we can overthrow a bad ruler. And Rousseau took it even further, arguing that the people themselves are the only true power.
Now, to really get why Hobbes and Locke came to such wildly different conclusions, you have to see where they started. They both imagined a state of nature, life before government. For Hobbes, it was pure misery and anarchy, a war of all against all. But for Locke, it was a paradise, a state of peace and goodwill. This one disagreement shaped everything that followed in their philosophies.
And from John Locke, we get this world-changing phrase, life, liberty, and property. These aren't gifts from a king. They are rights you have just because you're a human being. A government's only job is to protect them. And that idea of property was so important to Locke. It wasn't just about owning land. It was about owning yourself, your own labor, and being free from a tyrannical state. It's a cornerstone of modern freedom.
Then Rousseau came along and just blew the doors off the whole thing. He radicalized the social contract by arguing that true power, sovereignty, can never be given away to a ruler. It always stays with the people. And the government? They're just employees. They're the hired help. They're to carry out what he called the general will of the community.
So, where has this long road brought us today? Well, the natural law tradition is still very much alive and evolving. Modern philosophers have started looking not just at the content of laws, but at the very process and logic of law itself. Take a thinker like Lon Fuller. He shifted the focus to something he called the internal morality of law. His point wasn't about whether a law was good or bad in its content, it was about the process. Think about it. A law that's kept secret, or is impossible to understand, or that changes every day, can you really call that a law? Fuller argued that because we're all vulnerable humans with limited resources and understanding, a legal system has to be clear, public, and consistent to be fundamentally fair. It's a natural sense of how the rules of the game ought to work.
So, what a trip, right? We've seen this single idea start out as a philosophical debate in Greece, get turned into a practical legal tool by the Romans, then viewed through a divine lens for centuries, and finally explode back onto the scene as the very foundation for human rights and democracy. It's an amazing journey.
And all of that brings us to the big, unavoidable question at the end. The idea of a universal law, a higher standard of justice, is incredibly powerful, but in a world with so many different cultures, religions, and values, whose morality are we talking about? Who gets to decide what's natural and what isn't? That's the challenge, and it's why the natural law tradition is still one of the most fiercely debated and most important ideas in the world today.